Let the countdown begin.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the 100 Fantasy Football Channel. My name is Ivan Herrera. I'm gonna do that all over again. What's up, guys? Welcome to the 100 Fantasy Football Channel. My name is Ivan Herrera. If we're meeting here for the first time, the purpose of this channel is to bring purposeful community to fantasy football, and I'd really appreciate if you hit that like button so that way we can continue to spread this all over the algorithm. And of course, if you're not already, please sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell so that way you are notified every single time I go live on YouTube. And look, it's the final week of the fantasy football season, and there's so much going on right now. There is going to be some things I'm going to be sharing today about some lessons that I learned from 2021 that I'm going to be applying in 2022. And there's some also, I'm going to go over some players that I think should start this week for your lineups in case you are still playing in matchups, as well as if you are into DFS as well. I'm going to be going over those players. And let's actually quickly go over the show breakdown. And here's what we got. So I'm going to be going over some lessons from 2021, some things I learned the hard way, some things that I wish I would have maybe have known that I now know that I'm going to be, of course, approaching, and some things that I think will help you as we get ready for the off season. And just giving you a quick little update, I will still be posting weekly. I will be going live. I'll be doing hopefully some more videos. And this year, going into 2022, into the new season, one thing I'm going to commit myself in doing is also bringing on some guests in the industry, so that way they can continue to help you out in your fantasy football journey, so that way you can continue to learn and grow. And of course, as always, any and all things that I reference are going to be mentioned in the description below, so be sure to check those things out. So for now, let's go ahead and get into the lessons that I learned going into the 2021 season. And one of the main ones is that, listen, as we recap into the season, some of the things that I learned is, of course, and I think we all knew this really, is that the tight end position continues to be one of the most shallow and brings actually the worst return when it comes to fantasy football. And the one example that I can give you is Darren Waller. Darren Waller is a player that we know is an elite tight end, someone that was coveted in the third round range. His average ADP was actually tight end 15, rather was tight end 4, and when we actually look, brother, he was in that 3 or 4 range, right? But then when we compare it to someone like a Dalton Schultz, he was undrafted. The way that they actually finished off the year was a huge difference. So Darren Waller ended up finishing the season as tight end 15, whereas in Dalton Schultz is tight end number 4. In 7 games that Schultz had at least, so let me actually retract that a bit. So Schultz had 7 games with at least 6 receptions and or a touchdown, while Darren Waller only had 4 of those games. So it's really hard to predict the production of tight ends, but one thing we do know is the position is really hard to predict, and the return that they bring you is very, very minimal compared to that of other positions. And one thing that we also learn, lesson number 2, is that quarterbacks continue to show you that you can wait on them later into the draft. So let me just give you another example of this. Matthew Stafford and Kyler Murray. Both players had really good seasons, but both were coveted very differently in the drafts. So for instance, if you wanted to get Kyler Murray on your roster, he cost you maybe a 4th round price tag. And if you wanted Matthew Stafford, you probably could have got him in the 9th, in the 10th round. But as the year went on, and as now we've come to a close of the season, we're seeing Matthew Stafford is QB5 of the year, and Kyler Murray is QB11. So there's so many different things that we're seeing here as far as a huge discrepancy, especially because Matthew Stafford isn't a rushing quarterback that can get you the upside like a Kyler Murray can because of his ability to run the ball. And it's really crazy because Matthew Stafford had 11 games where he had 250 plus yards and a touchdown, whereas Murray only had 5 of those games. And the reason why I use 250 and 1 touchdown is because that at least gets you 16 points, assuming that you don't turn the ball over as a quarterback. And it's just crazy that you can continue to find really good value later into the draft. That's one thing that I continue to believe in as my philosophy when it comes to drafts, and one thing that I would also encourage you to continue doing as part of your fantasy football strategy. Now, the third lesson I learned was that running backs continue to make or break your rosters. And the reason why I say that is because of the top 10 players in fantasy football, 6 of them are running backs. And here's the list: Cordell Patterson, Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Elijah Mitchell, Alexander Madison, and Chuba Hubbard. And it's crazy because of those players that are obviously running backs, 3 of them this season were known as handcuffs. Of course, we didn't know that Patterson was going to really serve as a running back full time for Atlanta, but for sure that of course, Alexander Madison and Chuba Hubbard. And look at them, both are still producing at a pretty high level, which I think solidifies what I said a few weeks back, and I'll link this video that where I spoke about how handcuffs are so essential for a fantasy football roster and how they can make or break your season. And we're seeing right now the production as we come to the very end of the season of what they can actually produce. So now let's go ahead and go into lesson number 4, and that is wide receivers continue to show their depth. And of course, we had 2 huge outliers this season, Cooper Kupp as well as Deebo Samuel, 2 players that were really sought out later into the draft. Cooper Kupp was going around the 4th, 5th round range if you were lucky. Deebo Samuel was going much later in that 9th, 10th round, and both of them respectfully are in the top 3 as far as wide receiver production in fantasy football. And what's crazy to me is that even of those players, you even see the same production with the rookie class that we got with Jamar Chase, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, as well as Devontae Smith. Those 4 players are in the top 30 of wide receivers overall. So it's just crazy how deep this position continues to be. And going into next season, I think I'm going to actually have a different strategy where I'm going to wait off on wide receivers, being that there's so many, and try to invest as I possibly can in some of these running backs, because it's so hit or miss. And really, the makeup of your roster should be really dependent on where your running back position is, because that's going to really make or break your season. And one thing I wanted to also share was that and this is now this is 1, 2, 3, 4. My 5th lesson is that waiver wires matter. There's this amazing article from Tristan H. Cockcroft from ESPN, where he does this thing every single season. It's called the most common players on playoff teams. And of the 12 players that are on that top list, 6 of them were undrafted players. So this is just solidifying the point that waiver wires matter. The way that you work the waiver wire throughout the season, your in-season management is so vital. The way that you obviously build the foundation of your team begins at the draft, no doubt. But the way you then continue to solidify the foundation and overall the strength of your roster is dependent on how you manage your roster as far as waiver wires and even trades. But the example that I saw here was that this is just crazy. 6 of 12, that's 50% of the players that are most commonly in fantasy football playoff matchups were the ones that weren't even drafted. So that's one of the things that I can give you as a pointer going into next season is continue to have the philosophy of, yes, when you want to draft at a very, very high level, but you also don't want to be dependent on just your draft. You have to continue to work, and it's a lot of research, a lot of trends, a lot of, okay, which players are getting more looks now, and also cutting off the emotional tie that you may have with certain players that you drafted at a certain place. So for example, one of the players that I was really high on going into this offseason, going into this past offseason was Trey Sermon. And I drafted him in the 5th round in my home league. And I had to cut bait after week 3, after week 4. I think it was early on, week 4, week 5. And that was a bummer because I thought like, man, I really swung for the fences for this guy. And I really wanted to, just make a huge splash by putting so much faith in him, and unfortunately it didn't pan out. But it's one of those things that unfortunately happens in fantasy football, and one of the things that you will continue to learn as you go on in your fantasy football journey. So these are the top 5 lessons that I learned in 2021. Hopefully you got value in that, and if you did, hit that like button, and also let me know in the comments what are some of the things that you learned most about fantasy football this past season. Let's go ahead and go to the quick show breakdown. We're going to quickly go over the players that I love going into Week 18. And from there, we're going to go ahead and share my bold prediction for the final time this season. So let's go ahead and get into the players that I like. And the players that I like right now are going to be Rashad Penny. And I get it right now. He's going up against the Arizona Cardinals in week number 18. They average out to be a top 5 defense with the fewest points allowed. They're in the top 5 when it comes to fewest points allowed on an average basis to the running back position. However, they are in the middle of the pack with how many rushing yards they allow. They actually are overall 17th in that category. And listen, Rashad Penny has averaged, when he gets at least 15 touches or more, he averages about 27 fantasy points per game. So I like that, being that there is a defense. These divisional matchups always tend to be trap games. And even though Arizona is right now still in the playoff hunt as far as positioning wise goes, they already clinched their playoff berth. But I think that Rashad Penny is going to get a huge and a heavy dosage going into Week 18, which should make him a very must start for this upcoming week. Now, another player that I like is Darnell Mooney at wide receiver. He is a player that just came off a game where he had 13 targets versus the New York Giants, and in the last 6 of 7 games, he has had 7 targets or more, including 2 games where he's had double-digit targets. And during that span, he's been wide receiver 14, and he's going up against Minnesota. They average the most points per game to the wide receiver in fantasy football. So it's a plus matchup with the player who's been absolutely on fire. So he is a must start in week number 18. And 2 more players. The next player I want to go over is tight end Foster Moreau. He's going up against the Chargers in a very decisive Week 18 matchup where it's basically win or go home for the Chargers or the Raiders. And the Chargers actually allow the most points to tight ends. And though they've only played once, they played earlier in the season, Moreau was not part of that matchup. He was inactive. The last time he had a plus matchup was versus Philly in week number 6, and he was 6 for 6 for 60 yards and had 1 touchdown. And I think that this is going to be one of those games where Foster Moreau is going to play a big part of the Raider offense and is going to be successful as well, being that the matchup bodes well against a tight end like Foster Moreau. Now, the last one is going to be the bold prediction, the final one for week number 18, or rather the final one for 2021 and the one for week 18. So here we go.
The bold strategy, Todd. Let's see if it pays off for him.
So, my bold prediction for Week 18, the final one for 2021, is quarterback Trey Lance from the San Francisco 49ers. He's going up against the LA Rams, who are a top 5 defense as far as points allowed to quarterbacks on an average basis. And I get it, even though Lance didn't really run all that well in a plus matchup versus Houston, he still put up about 19 points, which is something that you can live with. And my thing is that the Rams are actually they're in the top 12 as far as most rushing yards allowed to the quarterback. And I believe that that's going to be what's going to make or break this whole situation. And I believe that Trey Lance will capitalize on that and be heavily utilized in a way where you get to kind of you can see San Francisco unpack what he can provide for this San Francisco offense. And my stat prediction for that is going to be that Trey Lance will throw for 211 yards, will have 2 touchdowns in the air, will also rush for 52 yards in the ground, giving him 29.6 points in fantasy this week in week number 18. And that is my bold prediction, Trey Lance. And guys, I just want to thank you so much. This is my first season ever going live on YouTube, doing this, and I don't take it lightly. So thank you so much for tuning in for this week 18 edition of the 100 Fantasy Football channel. Be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to also subscribe, share this with somebody. And as always, best of luck to you going into week 18. We'll see you again next week. Keep it 100.